So, what's the problem? Hours have to be cut. Where's your money? Bringing money into a place makes that place better.
We love having a little Carrie here, but
Payday's next week.
I want what you owe me.
At least let me take you out on a real date before you break my heart.
Some days I think this place is about to die. Other days I think something is really about to happen here.
Here you go. Are you serious? He's not homeless. Kid lives over on Maple.
Oh my God, I am so sorry.
What the Jesus?
What is it? Some kind of murder at the mill.
Rob. No guns, no body.
Got something to say.
You want me to shut down the mill? Cops are unpopular enough without taking bread out of people's mouths. This thing, it won't cost millions a penny. Promise you that. I'm a detective, that's all I am. Even if I wasn't working a case, I'd still want to know what was what. Evidence gets chased back to us, right? Insulted you even more. I ain't no keen on taking sides. It's white man tug of war.
We've gotten more information from the lab. It appears that there are 7 different kinds of blood from 7 different people.
We're all doomed.
I have been an incredible admirer of the founder of this movement for as long as I can remember now, which, because I'm an old guy, it's not so many years, but there it is. Cenk has been an inspiration, and what he has built and what all of you have built, I think we will look back to remember as the kernel, the beginning, the start of bringing this republic around. So when Mike says, I'm going to get up here and teach you some more, I'm not going to teach you anything. You know this issue as well as anybody in the nation, I think. What I want to do is to mark out where I am. And when I can mark out where I am, I hope in some questions we can get some debate, maybe a little bit more fierce than I understand the debate with my friend John Pudner was, but it's extremely great to see John here too, because Pudner is also an incredibly important part of this movement, because as you see at the end, in my view, the single most important move we can make is to find a way to turn off phones, but also to build the coalition between people of different values and different views, but committed to the fundamental value that we have a republic that represents everyone equally. Okay, so here's the first frame. I'm not actually sure that what's necessary for us to succeed is even possible in America today. I'm not sure. Because the reality is what's necessary for us to succeed is to find a way for us to rise above the partisans in American politics. To find a way not to deny our differences, because there are real differences. Not to minimize the importance of the values that we on the left really, really care about, like single-payer health care, or a minimum wage that really makes it possible for people to live, or climate change. Not to deny the significance of those issues, but to recognize that at certain moments, a republic needs to pause and to fix itself. And the only way it ever fixes itself truly is to step above the partisan divide and to reach across to people of honor on the other side and to say, let's put the arguments aside for a moment. the arguments of substance that we believe so much in, and let's focus on what we know we have to fix to make it possible for a democracy to work. Because we need to remember that before we were Republicans or Democrats, we were citizens first. And what we believe in this movement, in this Article 5 movement, what we believe is that constitutional change is necessary in America. Now, I've spent many years arguing that we can get a lot without constitutional change. We could fix a lot without actually changing our Constitution. But that shouldn't be confused with the view that we don't need constitutional change. I think fundamentally our Constitution has to be significantly altered to make it possible for democracy to continue to function. And that part of our reform movement is what you are so central to bringing about. So we can ask this question, what constitutional change? And the differences that I think we need to focus on are not as important as what unites this movement. And it's more importantly that we need to find a way to express what we believe. And what we believe is that we need this change in the basic frame of our government, and a change not controlled by Congress. Because what we believe in this movement is that we believe Congress is the problem. Congress is the institution that has allowed the corruption of this democracy to evolve. And that's something people on the left believe and people on the right believe. This is what unites us and why we are here in an Article 5. Movement, the failed branch of our government, is the institution we have to find a way to fix, and that fact is a huge problem for the reform movement, for this republic. Because if you think about the failure of a judge being proven as corrupt, or an alcoholic, or just insane, our Constitution has built in a system for dealing with a bad judge. We impeach that judge. Or if you can imagine, I don't know if you can imagine, a terrible... You guys are smart. Just like, shut your eyes for a minute. Just imagine a constitutionally, insanely terrible president. Our Constitution has embedded a way to deal with that problem. Either we don't select him in the next election or we impeach him. That is the plan that is given to us in our constitutional doctrine. But Congress, in our Constitution, is essentially untouchable. The institution is untouchable because we don't elect a Congress. We elect members to Congress. And what that means is in our voting, there is no one who we elect with the means or the motive to fix Congress directly. Now, this problem was not completely missed by the framers. Indeed, I think some of the framers saw this as one of the flaws in their original constitutional design. Just a couple days before the first draft of the Constitution was released, George Mason noticed this flaw because the then structure for amending the Constitution said that the only people who could amend the Constitution was Congress. It was Congress that would propose the amendments and Congress that could ratify the amendments by sending them out to the states. And what Mason said was, what if Congress is the problem? So he wrote, as he spoke on the floor of the convention, no amendments of the proper kind would ever be obtained by the people if the government should become oppressive. And what that did was to lead to this least understood clause of our Constitution, the clause which you understand better than most law professors, Article 5's Convention Clause. Because what Mason recognized and convinced the convention of is that we needed a path around the corrupted institution of Congress. A path that would allow the people, through their states, to rally, to fix the Constitution, to avoid what could be the alternative, which would be a revolution. Now, what's astonishing to me is the ignorance. The really astonishing ignorance about this clause. But the good news here is that it's bipartisan ignorance. So, for example, let me pick on somebody on our own side here for a second. This piece in the February 2016 describes this platform put together by a group of, quote, reform groups. As it described in the article, efforts are being undertaken in state legislatures to pass resolutions calling for a constitutional convention to send various constitutional amendments to the states for ratification. If these efforts are successful, it would result in the nation's first constitutional convention since 1787 convention that adopted the Constitution. It would also create the opportunity for a runaway convention that could rewrite any constitutional right or protection currently available to American citizens. This is conventional wisdom? No. This is conventional ignorance in American politics today. This is what both sides believe. And we should be clear about how totally confused this rhetoric is. So let's start with these words: constitutional convention. The reality is an Article 5 convention is not what constitutional theorists understand as a constitutional convention. What a constitutional convention is a convention that has the power to blow up the existing constitution, to make up its own rules, to do whatever the hell it wants, because it speaks, as the French put it, and if it's put it in French then it sounds more authentic, with the constituent power. The constituent power, the power of the people, is expressed in a constitutional convention, but that is not what Article 5 is. Article 5 is not a constitutional convention the way 1787's convention was. The convention of our framers was a constitutional convention because, I'm sure you know, they took their old constitution and just threw it away. They violated the rules for amending their constitution to get the new constitution. And they did so believing they had the power, when it went out to the States and States Convention, to speak for the people. And they did so. They created this convention outside of the Articles of Confederation themselves. The Articles of Confederation had no provision for calling a convention. This was a convention expressing what Jefferson believed and America at the time understood, that a people have an unalienable right to alter or abolish their constitution. That's what they were doing. But I don't know whether I know anyone calling for a constitutional convention in that sense today. Maybe there are. Maybe we're going to have to if we fail long enough. But right now, I don't know anybody calling for that sort of a convention. What I think we're trying to do is to call the convention spoken of in the plain language of this really hard to read document a convention for proposing amendments. It's a convention for a particular purpose, and that purpose defines its limits. Indeed, Article 5 goes on to describe expressly that whatever this convention does has no power until it is ratified by 3/4 of the states. So this language, this power created by the Constitution is something fundamentally different from what the framers of our Constitution were doing. They were giving us a power for proposing amendments, a power limited by the express terms of Article 5. The only power this convention has is the power for proposing amendments, and it cannot, in that sense, run away in the way people talk about the original constitutional convention running away. The only thing it can do is fail. Now, they say, though, our opponents, the people who oppose the idea of an Article 5 convention, they say, I don't know, it did before run away, this thing you call a convention, so it can run away again. And that's their fear. That if we created a convention that has this echo from what happened in 1787, it'll run away as that article described and change the Constitution willy-nilly, violating the rules. The First Amendment is gone. The 14th Amendment is gone. The Second Amendment is repeated over and over and over and over again. They say that 1787 convention is a precedent. And in the law of constitutional law, we have to look to precedents and recognize they can be repeated. And if they can be repeated, then we should recognize a convention is always available to destroy the existing constitution. Okay, so let's just be clear about what they do then. Meaning, what exactly is the precedent of 1787? And to answer that question, we're going to play a little game. What I'm going to ask you to do is to identify at what step in the process was the law or the Constitution or whatever you want to say violated. When did they cross the line between what was legally permissible and what was a violation of existing law? Okay, so the steps in 1787 back then were, number one, there was a rogue convention that was pulled together. So Annapolis in 1786 had failed. And even without the presence of a quorum to enable them to discuss anything, they said, let's think about getting together in Philadelphia in 1787. And so they said, sounds like a good idea. We'll get together in 1787. And they sent this word back to Congress and out to the states. And the states said, okay, we can have a convention in Philadelphia beginning in May 1787. But what that convention can do is just consider amendments to the Articles of Confederation. And the very first act they did was to close the doors, seal the windows, pull the shades down, and say, to hell with that. We're not going to sit around wasting our time talking about amending this failed document. We're going to write a new constitution. So the rogue convention ignored the limits given to them by the states and Congress about what they could do. They then recommended to Congress at the end of their convention 4 months later in September. They recommended to Congress a new constitution. And critically, they recommended that that new constitution be adopted in a way that was inconsistent with the rules set down in the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation said a new constitution has to be adopted, or a new amendment to the Constitution has to be adopted unanimously. And what these guys said is, oh, we have a better idea. Better than unanimously, what about if 9 states agree? That's close enough for government work, right? So 9 states. If we get 9 states, that's a legitimate amendment. So they said, we have a recommendation. Our recommendation is you say 9 states, and when those 9 states have ratified in convention, then we're going to recognize a new constitution. Then step 4 is, Congress listened to this, read the Constitution, and said, okay, sounds like a good idea to us. And so Congress adopted the recommendation of the convention and sent it out to the states saying, we'd like you to consider whether to ratify this And the states debated it, and there's an amazing history told in the book called Coup, by my colleague Mike Klarman, which is about a 1,000-page book. So if you ever need to sleep, you can bring this book to your bedside. But the amazing story of the ratification here, which his point is just how tenuous the ratification was. There were so many moments when it could have gone the other way. And the framers were so genius in their political strategy of where they would bring it first to make it create the momentum necessary to bring them over the final line. But Congress adopted the recommendation, sent it out, and said, do it according to this recommendation, and of course, eventually it was ratified. All right. Which of these steps was illegal? All of them? All right. Was the first step illegal? I mean, they were told, get together and think about this, but they said, no, we don't want to do that. Is that against the law? I mean, they just didn't do what they were told. If not doing what you were told is against the law, then Congress has been illegal every day of its life. There's nothing illegal in just getting a bunch of people together and talking about what they're going to, what you think a new constitution should be. We could talk about a new constitution. You wouldn't be illegal. I know that would depress some of you because you want to sort of be rebels and get arrested, but you wouldn't get arrested for sitting down and talking about a constitution. So number one is not illegal. Number two, ignoring the limits of what they were told they could talk about. Is that illegal? Hell no, it was a free country. You could talk about whatever the hell you want to talk about. Number three, recommending something to Congress. They sent a letter to Congress. They said, here's what we've done, and what we'd like you to do is to consider our proposal. And our proposal is send this out to the states. And when the states, 9 of them agree, then you should consider this constitution ratified. I send letters that violate the Constitution all the time to Congress. And, I don't get arrested. I haven't been arrested. Well, I have been arrested once with this matter here. The Democracy Spring protest. But it has nothing to do with my recommendations to Congress. So the convention sending a recommendation to Congress is not illegal. What is illegal is this. What violated the rules was this. When Congress said, hell yeah, this is a good idea. The Constitution says unanimous, no like unanimous. Let's try 9. That was the illegal act. Wow. And then what followed after that was, according to the original Constitution, legal. But this detail is really critical because when they say there's a precedent out there, you have to understand what the precedent was. What was the illegal act that they're fearful is going to repeat itself? Right? They're fearful that when it happens, some constitutional historians can stand and say, this illegality, this happened in 1787, so it's therefore okay. Right? So let's map out what that could be. The precedent they say is Congress ignored the express rules for how to ratify an act. That is the only precedent of an illegal act. Okay? Let's think about it now. Let's imagine we convened a convention. Let's say it's a convention that was convened for the purpose of considering campaign finance reform. We can treat, and convened after, legislature said you're going to consider a campaign finance. And midway through the convention, apologize for this tragedy, describing a tragedy like this, because I'm sure that in America some of you are touched by a tragedy like this, but imagine midway through the convention, there's another massacre at some school. And imagine the chairman of the convention's daughter has been slaughtered. And she comes to the convention and she says to the convention, these agreements, they're bullshit. Total bullshit. What we should do is we should propose an amendment to abolish the Second Amendment. So, she ignores the limits. And the convention, feeling the emotion of the moment, says, hell yeah. And they vote unanimously to abolish the Second Amendment. And then they say, this is not passed, three-fourths of the states, but if we had a referendum, a national referendum, it would pass. So here's our idea. Send our proposal to abolish the Second Amendment to Congress, but in that proposal, recommend a new way of ratifying this amendment. Say this amendment will be law if a national referendum finds at least 60% of Americans support. Okay, so perfectly parallel to what the framers did. The framers said this is a disaster, we're going to write a new constitution, and we're going to propose a new way of amending. Okay, now we get to the precedent. And I want you to imagine Speaker Pelosi. That's hard for some of you, but okay. I like Nancy. She raises the most money for anybody, but she also has now moved that the next Congress, if it's a Democratic Congress, will consider campaign finance as a top issue in the first weeks of the Congress. So you got to give her something. So imagine Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, is so moved. She is so moved by the tragedy and the drama that she gets this letter from the convention that says this will be amended if 60% ratified in a national referendum. And she says that's a great idea. And imagine she says to Congress, let's do it. Let's send it to the states and say to the states, only 60% in a national referendum need to adopt this, and that will be part of the Constitution. Here's the question. Here's the obvious, totally obvious question. Does anybody believe that Nancy Pelosi has the power to change the rules for ratifying an amendment to the Constitution? Does anybody believe that if some constitutional law professor stood up and said, Second Amendment people, actually what she's doing by saying that there's going to be a different way to ratify the amendment is exactly what the framers did. So therefore it's okay, totally okay. Does anybody believe that there would take more than 2 hours for the Supreme Court to be thinking about this proposal? And despite the Supreme Court saying again and again, we don't really think we should think about amendment processes, does anybody believe that the Supreme Court would say, hell no, look at the plain words of Article 5. The plain words of Article 5 say, the only way to amend the Constitution is if 3/4 of the states agree with it, whether you like that or not, and I don't like it at all, but that's what's in the words of Article 5. My point is, this whole idea that we could copy the illegal precedent and fear that that illegal precedent would somehow render our Constitution vulnerable is not even imaginable in real political terms. It is just bullshit used by people who want to embed the status quo by terrifying people who don't have 10 minutes like you've just taken to work through the obvious idiocy in this argument. The point is, it is not even plausible that the Supreme Court would allow them to do what the framers of our Constitution did for 1,000 reasons, but the most obvious, that the Supreme Court hates Congress, and the Speaker of the House, whether Republican or Democrat, said they're changing the rules for amending the Constitution. It would be laughed out of court in 10 minutes. We have to do better in making this absolutely obvious argument clear to everyone. We have to call bullshit. I'm sorry, my daughter. And we have to find a way to make it so people don't follow this idiocy to the point that we can't do anything about it. Because these unimaginable dangers they talk about, which are literally unimaginable once you unpack it, are blocking the opportunity for us to address certain disasters. And I don't mean certain as in particular, I mean certain as we will certainly have a disaster in this democracy if we don't find a way to fix this Constitution. It is absolutely clear that we are destroying the capacity for self-government. And unless we change this system, constitutionally, we can't recover. That is a certain disaster. And these unimaginable dangers are stopping too many people from addressing that certain disaster. So, when you ask why, because what these groups are, what these reform groups are, the truth is, what really is behind this is these are people who are deeply skeptical. They would say of state legislators, but I think what they're really skeptical of is representative democracy. What they're really skeptical of is the people. What these people are keen to keep control in the elites for how our Constitution evolves. Jake may tell the story. I'm sorry if you're including your story here, but Jake and I met with the head of Common Cause before the election. We're trying to lay out the argument for Article 5. He's a smart guy. He's a good guy. At that moment, he was like, why should we risk it? When, Hillary will just appoint the justices we want, and we'll fix the constitutional problem that way. Now, of course, I haven't had a chance to talk to him after that about how his calculations Hillary's not yet. Maybe there are emails that point to the justice. I don't know. So I know his calculation is different, but the reality is, as we know, we who dealt with these people know, these people are deeply elitist. And they are so cynical and skeptical of the capacity of America to deal with their Constitution that the idea of self-government dealing with the founding document of self-government is just beyond them. They can't imagine. Now, don't get me wrong. Look, I'm a Harvard law professor. I may elite people for a living. And I don't mean to say that I'm anti-elite. Like, I think it's good to have, a couple of smart people in the room. But we have tried elite constitutionalism long enough. We have tried the system where we allow the elite to fix our problems long enough, and they haven't fixed our problems yet. And so I think for far too long, this attitude of handing our Constitution over to the senior elites, lawyers, and law professors, for far too long, that's been the way we think about constitutional law. And what this movement is, I think, most excitedly about is a movement to bring the people back in to the constitutional movement, to bring the people back into the process of describing what should be the rules that govern us, because they are our rules. We, the people, are governing ourselves, or that's the theory, and let's at least find a way to fight for that theory. This elitism has produced a constitution ever more remote from the people. We have to try something different. We have to try a constitution finding, again, for the people. Okay, I want to make one final point for us. I think no one takes seriously enough in this case that this movement cannot seem to be partisan. It cannot be and it cannot seem to be partisan. That doesn't mean partisan sides can't rally for a convention. But the movement cannot be a partisan movement. Because if it is partisan, then it will fail. And the mechanism of its failure should be obvious to us. If there were a right-wing convention, which is the most likely outcome of the current Article 5, the most likely outcome is that there will be, in the next 5 years, a convention called for the purpose of dealing with an issue that America perceives as a right-wing issue. That would be a gift to the Democratic Party. It will be the gift of a money printing machine to the Democratic Party. You're already getting these emails from the Democratic Party. You should see, right, these emails saying, the right wing is about to destroy our Constitution, so what we need to do is to rally to stop the convention movement. And they love it, because fear and uncertainty and distrust produces extraordinary amounts of money for their conference, and so they get hundreds of millions of dollars in this fight, if this fight actually were produced by there being a right-wing convention out there. And the same thing with a left-wing convention, or what's perceived as a left-wing convention. It would be a gift to the Republican Party, a money printing machine, which they would exploit by talking about how we're going to destroy the First Amendment, we're going to destroy the Second Amendment, we'll destroy the, well, here's the Third Amendment, but the point is, they will terrify their base, and their base will send all of their money to the Republican Party. Either way, we have to see, we have to hear what the consultants will say. The consultants, I love this girl. They will be licking their chops when they recognize. So you must resist it. The consultants will love the world of a partisan convention because it gets them what they need, more money. You must resist it. We must resist it. Actively. I don't think we've done enough. Not to oppose, but to support a cross-partisan Article 5 convention or a race of conventions. We understand that there would be two medium, or one that can consider two sides. I think that it's critical for us to say, I support an Article 5 convention that will consider issues affecting the issues I care about, what I call representational integrity, all the ways in which we've allowed special interests to corrupt our election process. But I support that, as well as a convention that has the opportunity to consider what we could call fiscal responsibility. I think are disastrous ideas, but let them consider. I support both. Because that's the only way for either to have a fair shot at making their ideas debatable among the people in the state, so that we force the states have a chance, the opportunity to actually validate. I support this not as a Democrat, not as a former Republican, but I support this as a citizen first. That's got to be our influence. Inspired me to join your movement. Brings me back to saying I'm not sure that what's necessary is possible. All that I'm sure of is it's necessary. So if there is inspiration that it is possible, then let's just go for 1 minute back to this extraordinary event. So when people look at this, they think, what's the diversity? White men over the single blindness of our framers was their obliviousness to the issues of equality as it affects race and sex and, well, in a certain perspective, but we should recognize this is an incredibly diverse group. In this text, there were people who believed slavery was the moral abomination of the age. And people who believed slavery was a national power that any free society should be allowed to exercise. There could be no difference as fundamental as that. But what they would do was to bracket that long enough to craft a constitution to save the republic. Now, I'm the first to say maybe that was a bad thing. For the slaves, it was certainly a bad thing. What it did was embed that system, which many people think if there had been a republic, slavery would have been over in 10 years, 15 years, because it couldn't have survived without the support of the North. So maybe that's true, but my point is not to say it's a great thing to have a constitution that embedded slavery. My point is to say, if they could bracket the hardest moral struggle there is, we should be able to bracket our arguments about healthcare or the minimum wage. We should be able to say, I'm not giving up my fight. I'm not telling you I'm not going to fight for this. But we should be able to say, let's fix what we know is broken so that we can get back to a government that can actually do it. That's what they could put aside those differences. And so too must we. Thank you very much.
We're just going to do an open Q&A. Yes, why don't we Q&A? Looks like there's a question.
Firstly, thank you very much for your time and your expertise. I have one question that is going to drastically impact Tennessee's ability to move forward. How would you frame campaign finance reform in a way that could be considered a moral right?
Well, okay, that's a great question. Because in my view, people talk about campaign finance reform in a very unproductive way. What they typically talk about when they talk about campaign finance reform is how terrible it is to have unequal speech in the political market. As if the objective of government should be to equalize speech. Like if somebody speaks too well, you put pebbles in their mouth. That was something that I read. So to equalize so everybody has the same political influence. And when you speak like that, you trigger a very strong First Amendment reaction. Not just on the right, but on the left. Remember, Citizens United was supported and pushed by the ACLU. Right? And they pushed by the ACLU because they view any political speech regulation as a violation of the fundamental values of this one. So I don't talk about campaign finance reform by talking about the speech in the marketplace. I talk about campaign finance reform by talking about the dependence it produces of representatives on a tiny fraction of the public. Members of Congress, candidates for Congress, spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money. They're raising money from no more than 100,000 Americans. So they spend most of their time focused on what 100,000 Americans care about. That's a dependence. But it's a dependence not on an average American or even a representative American. It's a dependence on an incredibly narrow set of interests. So it's a dependence that conflicts with what the framers of our Constitution promise the dependence of representative government would be. James Madison in Federalist 52 said, we would have a Congress that would be, quote, dependent on the people alone. Dependent on the people alone. And then to clarify, Federalist 57, he says, by the people, that's why I'm going to be a preacher, so here I get to be a preacher by quoting my Bible. So, Federalist 57, by the people, he means, quote, not the rich more than the poor. So they had a clear conception of a system that would be dependent on all of us. We have clearly produced a system that's dependent on a tiny few. That is a corruption of the system they gave us, and we ought to be able to address that corruption. George Mason said that we would create Article 5 for the purpose of addressing precisely this kind of corruption. So talk about the corrupting dependence on an unrepresented few. Now, in the South, how many people from Texas Texas. Very visceral example of this kind of corruption. So, not just in Texas, but Texas most dramatically. You established something called the white primary. What the white primary said was, in the Democratic Party, the only people who were allowed to vote in the primary were white people. And the Supreme Court at first struck that down, then they tweaked it a little bit, and then the court struck it down again, and they tweaked it a little bit again, and the court in 1935 unanimously upheld it. Because they said the party was private, so therefore they could have freedom to associate, set up whatever primary they wanted. All of us see how having a system where you select your candidates by saying to the white people, you pick first, and then will allow everybody to vote among the people that you pick, all of us see how that is a corruption. Boss Tweed used to say, I don't care who does the electing, as long as I get to do the nominating. That is the white primary. That is the system we've produced right now. We've delegated to an unrepresentative few the power to pick who gets to be our candidates. That's obviously corrupt, and that's obviously something that even conservatives, and I know, because John and I have talked about this a million times, I know people on the right and people on the left thinking about the corruption of the system. Richard Painter's really fantastic book written when he was still a Republican. I regret he's not still a Republican, but makes this argument really powerful. I think you have that book here.
We don't hear part of last time. We'll send it.
Oh, there's the book.
Taxation only with representation, and we have a PDF copy of it in WolfPac. So.
Thank you very much. Could you talk to us a little bit more about I almost want to say bundling, but the phrasing of the, do you see it as two conventions? We agree to have this, you agree to, we're together, we're agreeing to have two conventions, so that then the idea of unbundling amendments or amendments at the end, we're talking just a little bit more about the I actually think Congress is going to be free to bundle or unbundle how it wants. Nobody's going to question that power of Congress. Even though I think some people don't think Congress has the power, I just think practically Congress does. But I think but the point about talking, or us disciplining ourselves to talk about a bundle project, where they get to make their proposals and we get to make our proposals, without minimizing our disagreement with their proposals, but just saying, we all recognize we're at a constitutional moment, we need a chance to address it. I think that practice begins to make it impossible for either political party to turn this into a moneymaker. Right now, it is a perfect opportunity, and it is a separate convention to make it into a moneymaker. So they're going to resist it. I know that ECCC is resisting it, because they love this as taking money into their campaigns. I'm not minimizing how hard it's going to be to get there. There's we ran a convention, we ran a conference in 2011. Frank was there at Harvard, a conference on the Constitutional Convention, which preempts the opponents by racing legalized stuff, And Mark Meckler, who is one of the most powerful right-wing advocates for a convention right now, and his organization is very successfully pushing for states without proposals that would basically shrink the power of the federal government. And that convention gave a really powerful speech about the politics of hate. And really, it's the most moving speech of that convention. And he said, they are invested in the politics of hate. They profit more than they can make us hate each other. And that's what they're doing, and the only way we will succeed is if we can rise above the politics of hate. It was a beautiful moment. But if any of you get Mark Meckler's emails, which I do, they are consistently practicing the politics of hate. Because what he learned is the only way to rally his base is to tell them to hate us. And the same thing on the left. The only way we rally our base is to tell them to hate them. And my view, and again, I say this was necessary, I'm not saying it's possible, my view is we have to find a way to get above that. Without denying the importance of the issues we care about. But by recognizing we're not going to get the issues we cared about addressed until we fix this problem. So talking in a way that gets people to that place is the most important thing right now. We could find 5 leaders, 5 real politician leaders. Well, it's too ridiculously hopeful, so I'm not going to mention it.
Is there a constitutional issue with the injection of foreign money influencing our elections?
So, constitutional issue. From Madison's perspective, when he said the people, he didn't even mean all the people in the United States, so he certainly didn't mean the French. So, from his perspective, sure, it's wrong to have a system where members of Congress or the president are dependent on foreign corporations or Vladimir Putin. Like, both of those are constitutionally problematic from Madison's perspective. But you're never going to get the Supreme Court to declare spending or contributions illegal without a statute. And you're never going to get a statute until we have a Congress that's not corrupted by this money. I mean, it is astonishing to see how quickly Congress has moved to the view that, it's okay to take whatever resources. The Russian bots want to have their free speech rights. The Constitution doesn't say no free speech rights for bots. So let the bots speak as much as they want. It's a violation of the First Amendment to shut them down. So, it's amazing how quickly we got to this place, but that's the pathology. We have to find a way to get above. I just came from an event where people remember Andrew Shue? So he's Elizabeth Shue's brother, and so he was on Melrose Place. So but Andrew Shue's working with Frank Luntz. Is that who he is? Yeah. And I saw Frank Luntz make this unfreaking believable presentation. The product has been going around to like 20 different focus groups. And in those focus groups, demonstrating how viciously separated America was. Frank Luntz made this amazing presentation, kind of come to Jesus on It was like, this is what we have to fix. We are never going to survive as a republic. This is who we are. We have to find a way to get beyond this. So I think this is a unique moment when good souls, or recovered souls, or, hoping to be good souls, people looking for the promised land someday you want to be allowed to enter, can be recruited to this. And I think that's the critical focus, much more than pointing at the absurdities of where we are.
Robert Wright recently mentioned that he talked to him before about he's on the iPad too, that's the he recently came out with a video that most of us didn't know about Article 5 convention here. And I'm wondering, as another elite professor type, who is knowledgeable of Article 5 convention and the contribution to take me to another video.
So I've heard his arguments every time, but I just can't bring myself to watch the video. But it's really brilliant, and he's done so much good for inequality. And so I don't need to minimize at all his contributions to the world. But okay, that's a great idea. I mean, I will watch the video. Movie video. he's like, you can do it like here, have here, and then I will pop out. Yeah, the cat's they're like, yeah, hey, we're going to give check. One more roll. No. What I was saying was the actual amendments that go out. Get ready, and we'll have the practical power to exercise how they want they should. You know, I think that there's a lot of people make a really powerful argument that you know, there's no such thing as a limited versus convention. And we have a call to a convention. Because if you have all the calls for conventions, then there's not and again, I think it's really important to separate in your mind the practical political reality of what Congress can do versus the tiny sliver of legal control that imagine exercise on their own. So I think there is no way to control Congress deciding either that, yes, we have enough of the Republican convention, we have enough convention, or the only convention we can call is not a narrow call, everybody's words have to be exactly parallel. Everybody's never been step in it. What I am absolutely convinced the Supreme Court will do is to come in and stop Nancy Pelosi from changing the rules for ratification to be 60% rather than 3/4 of the states. And this is a critical point to draw the question to be elected. There is no sensible person in the world who believe that they will allow the plain words of the Constitution to be negated by an act of the Speaker of the House, which is what it technically is, right? Because it's just the Secretary that's sending it out, and there's no, you know, the President's not even part of the process for this. So I think you have to recognize there are some places where the court will back us up, and most places that there's just political fights to be had. And, you know, they could go either way, but we have to begin to build the movement to get it to a place that could actually support the convention up. Let me just throw one strategy out there that I've been toying with and trying to deploy, and it's not something that, you know, WolfPac has agreed is a good idea, so I don't want to say that you guys have endorsed it, but it's a certain poetic ring to it. It's 13 states say they need it. So here's the way that works. Imagine getting 13 states right now to pass a resolution that says, we preemptively reject any amendment that is proposed by an Article 5 convention that does not permit issues of representational integrity to be discussed or to. So that from the moment 13 states ratify that, what that effectively means is that anything the convention did would be nullity. Now, the lawyers will say, well, that can't be effective, or it won't really be effective, but my point is, it would be enough, I think, to change the calculation of the right-wing convention movement to say, look, why do we want to jeopardize losing everything? Simply because we refuse to allow, you know, a bunch of crazy leftists to stand up and make proposals about how to fix campaign finance people. Why don't let them make their proposals? We'll win in the end, that's what they should pick, because they have the numbers. We'll be able to get 13 states to turn down any repeal of the First Amendment, so why not? So my point is, we have to think practically about what is the way to change the incentives enough to bring the movements together. If we bring the movements together, then I think we'll be in a place where neither side can afford to kill it. And then once we get a convention and real proposals, the real hard work will begin with convincing Americans that those proposals need to be part of the Constitution. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your work, your inspiration, and your sweat. And my daughter wants a WolfPac pin, so